Okay, hello everybody. Good evening. It is my pleasure to open the last session of our series of seminars, The Protests After 2011, organized by the Human and Social Sciences Foundation Sofia and financed by the Program for Support of the NGOs in Bulgaria, thanks to the financial mechanism of the European Economic Space 2009-2014. This project became possible thanks to Milena Yakimova, who is his director, the director of the project, and his spirit, if we speak metaphysically. We already had guests from Ukraine, Greece, Brazil, and Germany. This evening, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Professor Nilüfer Göle, who will be our last guest lecturer. Professor Gole teaches at École des hautes études en sciences sociales in Paris, which could be translated into English as the School for Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences. She is the author of many publications, and I will tell you just the titles of some English translations of her books. The Forbidden Modern, Civilization and Veiling, University of Michigan Press, 1996, Europe and Islam, The Lure of Fundamentalism and the Allure of Cosmopolitanism, Princeton 2010, and her last book, I will tell the name in French because it is published in French and in Turkish, and the German publication is coming now, and it will be also published in English. Musulmans au quotidien, une enquête européenne sur les controverses autour de l'islam. Or it could be translated Muslims in everyday life, an European inquiry on the controversies about Islam. It is published in French in 2015. Professor Gole has recently oriented her research towards the globally spreading protest movements in the public space. Her talk this evening is exactly on this topic, the protest movements in the public space, Gezi Park in Istanbul. So, Professor Gole, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored. I'm very happy to be invited by your program, by my colleague Bojan Znepolski, to share with you some of my reflections, some of my work. Maybe from this point of view, we can say that my work is really based on around the public sphere notion, because first part of my life I was interested by means of Muslim actors becoming visible in the public life in Muslim majority countries, but also now in Europe, because the visibility of Muslims in public space created a lot of controversy and debate in European countries, such as veiling, halal eating, mosque constructions, and so on. And now I'm more focused my work on protest movements in the public space. And I will speak about the Gezi case, because I think it's interesting to go into the details and make more embedded examples, give concrete examples, so that we can have a kind of shift our way of looking at these protest movements. But from this will be, I will give you, there will be no PowerPoint speech. This is just a picture. Maybe at the end I will show some pictures to visualize. But from the beginning, maybe it will be interesting for us to refreshen our memory on why public sphere and democracy. There is some kind of a relation between the two that we need to rethink through, because we use the term public sphere, public place, public square interchangeably, and we take it for granted that this is the condition, autonomy of a public sphere, a healthy communication, a healthy public sphere is the prerequisite for democracy. But I think we need to revisit this link between public sphere and democracy. This will be the kind of premise of my talk. It is basically Jürgen Habermas in his seminal work who established the relationship between public sphere and democracy. and if you remember, it is mostly important is equal access of citizens, because public sphere in German Öffentlichkeit means open space, so ideally open to all citizens, equal access of all citizens. And he has put the emphasis on the discursive dimensions of the public sphere, a rational debate. And also he has shown already the link between the more abstract and the more concrete dimensions of the public sphere. I make the distinction between public place, physicality, like coffee houses, literary circles, public squares, and places where people meet physically, and also the public sphere, more related in the abstract terms with democracy, how citizens can raise new issues to our society. So it is much larger than the political sphere in that respect. So there is this tension between public sphere as a more abstract unity and public places where really people physically meet and debate. And I think this tension is heuristically important, fécond, because we need both. And second moment maybe in social sciences, for those who know these, who are familiar with these debates, is when the work of Habermas was revisited by many social scientists in the United States. I'm referring to the collective edited work by Craig Calhoun. And that's how the notion of public sphere entered into our debates in the academic world from all over the world by this revisiting of his work when it came out in English. In Europe, it is less, I think it was less reinvigorated, less revisited. And it was with the book Craig Calhoun, we now introduce more the idea who is excluded from the public sphere, because ideally it is open, but it's never totally open. There are always some people who are excluded, who are not allowed to be part of the public debate, who are not allowed to be in the, allowed to have access to information, and information is getting more and more manipulated by mass media. And there is the rise of the mass culture. So what becomes mass culture with the enlightened public sphere? There you need more educated people, rationality, and so on. In this book, so there were many people like Nancy Fraser who spoke about counter-publics, of those who were subaltern, like women, and those who were not thought in the book of, who were not dealt with in the book of Habermas. And of course, the other thinkers like Hannah Arendt, who has put much more emphasis on the phenomenology of everyday life practices and the ways we make ourselves visible to each other, this visibility dimension, very important in her work. And also John Dewey, the experience, the experiment in the public sphere. So this is all, you know, these some kind of elements that we have when we start thinking and giving sense to this notion of public sphere in relation to our democracies. But I think we are entering into a new age, new phase, that we need to revisit this relation between public sphere and democracy for two reasons. One is this definition, the philosophers thought about this public sphere in the time of nation-building process. So it was one language community, and nationalism or national community and publics were somehow juxtaposed. However, today, publics are much more global. We are entering into migrant societies more and more in the European West, but also in other places. And there is a kind of hiatus, a kind of distance between what we call national community and multicultural publics. And when you can translate what I say to the European politics today, because of this hiatus, because of this difficulty to adjust multicultural publics to national community, there's more and more movements that defend the protection of national community, national values, national borders. So this is one thing, that publics are becoming, to say it more maybe telegraphically, publics are getting global, politics are remaining national. Okay, this is my first observation, which necessitates a different kind of thinking. And of course, secondly, technologies of communication we speak about. But this is not only because technologies of communication circulate information from one public to another, but also because it is private persons that are linked together. It is no more communication through public, but in a way, social media means persons are linked to each other, and without being forcibly controlled by public broadcasting or state information. So this person-to-person telecommunications means much more from private to private. So it also makes this virtual public space, as we call, but brings in much more the personal into public in a way, again in a very large, transversal, global way. So that is, for these reasons, the structural transformation, to take the subtitle of Habermas, the structural transformation of public space, public sphere. Today we have another structural transformation of the public sphere that really makes it much more transversal, global, and not contained within the national borders of communication and national values, and it is stretched out. So is it still the hub of democracy as we thought? Because without any public sphere, that was the premise of these thinkers, we don't have democracy, vital democracy. We need this public sphere, which is the space for citizens to bring new issues and raise new sensibilities into public, and therefore change political agendas and change democratic agendas. That's why it has been considered as the hub of democracy. Is it still the hub of democracy, or it is becoming the spot, vulnerable spot of democracy? And I think it is the both. And I will put also the emphasis on the vulnerability of the public life and public sphere today. One I have just mentioned. We see neo-nationalist populist movements everywhere in Europe, which impose politics of exclusion, but which also impose in the public debate a way of, I call it sabotage. It's almost like degenerating the public debate. When you look at the way these debates, now I go quickly from my research that I called Euro-Public Islam, that is European Public Islam, the way these debates were taken place. Debates are important, but the debates didn't go in the sense of plurality of points of view, but more and more the ways in which we othered Islam. It was almost like it is the othering of Islam and not those who were really in real-life practices. And so these debates didn't help for a vibrant democracy, but for a kind of sabotage of the public debate in that respect. And we see these neo-nationalist movements bringing together the extreme right traditions with secular left idioms, with secular left languages. So it is something new. It is not the old racist, xenophobic movements. That's why they are becoming much more at the center. Like, to give you one example, which is much easier maybe to understand, the difference between the two generational movements is Le Pen. You know Le Pen in France. She is the one who is the daughter of the first movement. And the difference between the daughter and the father is exactly what I'm saying. The father was considered to be extreme right, racist, xenophobic, and he was really all the time challenging the debate as an outsider, whereas the daughter is using also feminism, secular values, republican values, and she's not challenging the system, she's not anti-establishment. On the contrary, she's representing herself as part of establishment, as the core values of French national values. Okay, and then she makes converge secular values as well, like equality of sexes, as I said, feminism, against Islam. So in debating the presence of Muslims and Islam, it was also declared the end of multiculturalism. We can come to that in the discussion if it's necessary, but it is interesting because even in societies where multiculturalism was very popular, like in Britain or Netherlands, and this was announced by not only by intellectuals but also by politicians, it's the end of multiculturalism. So we are living in multicultural societies, but we don't know how to think of difference. And that's why the debate is becoming more and more impoverished in a way. Second reason why publics are getting vulnerable. Now, this was at the discursive level and exclusionary politics. The second is politics of terrorism. When you look at politics of jihadist terrorism, they target the public life. They target the public life. That is not only places that are not at all, almost, places that can be identified as military power, state power, but everyday life. When you look at when you remember the last recent attacks in Paris in November, it was not only Charlie Hebdo cartoonists, therefore public figures, but also the stadium, football stadium, concert halls, and kosher market. It's important that is public visibility of Jewish citizens. And when you look at it, it was almost from the beginning like that, not only in European countries, but also in Asiatic countries, in Istanbul, in Malaysia. There has been attacks really targeting. It's not only a question of numbers, but it's a question of a certain way of life, public life. So it is Paul Virilio who has written after 9/11 attacks in New York. He has written this book on saying this is now the politics. The war is changing from geopolitics to metropolitics. That is, the cities are getting the target. And it is urbanicide. This is destruction of urban public life. So this is another vulnerability added to the public places. The third one is almost in emerging countries, we see the desire to control the public sphere in the emerging countries, both by means of urban development, capitalism, and also by using the force of the majority rule. I have an example in my mind, of course, Erdogan, but also Putin, but also in India, Modi. These are new figures of authoritarianism. They really pay attention to regulate the public sphere. It is not just the open public sphere, but on the contrary, over-regulation, control by disciplinary practices, like in the, of course, Iranian Republic, also the norms of ways of life. The street life is under the control of moral police, but also in everywhere, so the public life is under state control. We know this is... but in developing countries, in emerging, in spite of middle classes and so on, and the propaganda becomes very important. The importance of media, private media, becomes very important. So this is a bit general picture. Now, coming to our subject, in this context, we have seen many public place movements. I call them public place movements because already how we name them is important. It is French philosopher Deleuze was saying, when we don't know how to name an event, because it doesn't fit totally to what we know, we start inquiry. What is this? So, is this a revolutionary movement? Is this social upheavals, mass movements? How we name them? So we have seen it in Tahrir in Egypt, first of all, I think Tahrir Square movement. And then Gezi in Turkey, Maidan in Ukraine. I give just 3 examples, but you have also here in Sofia, in other parts of Spain, Indignatos. And so these public place movements, the 3 of them, especially Tahrir, Maidan, and Gezi, they were also followed by severe repression and change of regimes almost. So that is interesting. So the fact that these movements existed didn't mean the opening of democracy. Okay, that's the spring, Arab Spring, and followed by, of course, military intervention and overthrow of a democratically elected government of Muslim Brothers in Egypt. And so Tahrir Square movement didn't continue to give rise to democracy. That's why people make some kind of, cynical comments on Arab Spring, saying that this is not a spring anymore. And Maidan in Ukraine, we see to what extent the stakes are very high at many scales, national and with Russia. And Gezi in Turkey, also after Gezi movement, which gave a lot of hope, a very severe repression of the movement was followed by a very authoritarian turn of the government. So the political outcomes of these movements, first of all, are not, we don't know about the political outcomes. It can go in many different ways. Some people say, what is the political outcome? So it didn't exist. No, I'm saying we have to put a distance between these movements and the political outcomes. Okay? And because they have opened up a new way of thinking politics, they have brought a new repertoire of action, new forms of action, and changed the political paradigm. And I'll try to show in which ways. First, the dimension of temporality, speaking about politics. Because politics, when we think of politics, we think of engagement in a party, in a movement, long-term engagements, structures, organizations. When I speak of public place movements, Maidan, I call it now Maidan movements. It's wonderful because Maidan means public square, originally from Persian language, but historically from the Ottoman Empire. This public places is called Maidan, so it's a generic name, and also it's interesting because we call it Meydan. Meydan. In Turkish we call it Meydan too, but in the thank you. No, I mean the way we pronounce it is Meydan, but the European languages in France, they took it as Maidan. That's thank you for the correction. I have to use Maidan.
No, I'm just giving information in Bulgarian.
But I'm happy to hear that because I shouldn't be intimidated to call it Maidan. So Maidan movements, I call it Maidan movements because it's like public square movements, and it shows that there's not one place of creation for democratic imaginaries. So we change the word, it also helps us to think differently. It is different to say public square than Maidan, okay? And so I really keep that, again, language, that's why it's very important, because, and including the accent, and I try to put all the time Maidan movements, and not only referring to Ukraine, but Ukrainian movements, because they are public, it's in order to change our sensibility from only Western experiences to open up to other experiences where East and West converges here in that sense. So the temporality is interesting because temporality is, it's like a happening. It just some time in a kind of, the time dimension is not like a political party, but there is a moment of occupation. I'll come to the word occupation because it's not really occupation. It's a time for coming into Maidan, coming into avenues, but that is not the same temporality as a political temporality, as I call it, more theatrical. It's a mise en scène. It's like a happening. But once you see it, then things are never the same. Once it happened, that's the way. Well. it's Rosan Vallon who calls democracy, because it's nice to give this in easy way of definition. It's a forms of collective action in which citizens act together as equals. And I think in Maidan movement, it was like people were acting together as equal in a way. And in this sense, what is this new forms of acting together? What makes it different than we can make an exercise in social sciences? There were people like Jeffrey Alexander who has written, these are global civil societal movements. Civil society was there, but I don't think these were civil societal movements. These were, or some kind of social movements like we have called feminism, green. They were there, true. But these are something different than civil societal movements. First, this spatial aspect after temporality. Spatial aspect is very important. That's why we name them according to the space they have manifested, they have demonstrated. The space matters. So the spatial aspect is Tahrir, Gezi, Meydan, Wall Street, or other places. And the emotions, rather than ideologies or well-formulated claims like indigné, indignatos. It's important. We are angry. We are it's not angry. It is we ask for dignity. We ask for recognition as citizens. In a way, they bring all the citizens, because people go into the streets, go into the avenues, go to the public square, to Meydan, and once they are in the place, there's also the issue of memory. Maybe I'll come to that later, because the memory of the place also plays a very important role. In the Gezi example, we'll see it. In the Gezi Park movement, first I call it Gezi Park. There was a little park in the midst of Istanbul, and I've seen, my eye sees the poster made for this talk. There is a tree, and really there were few trees that was going to be uprooted for an urban management project. And so there was an occupation of this little Gezi Park by young people who really wanted to defend this Gezi Park and not to give it away as a public space, as their own. And so this was the element that triggers the movement, that triggered the movement. And I think in each movement there is a triggering element. And this was urban management. It's a kind of confiscation also of the public garden by private capital, because they were going to, they said, construct a shopping mall. Okay, shopping malls is everywhere. And I say capitalism is always considered as something abstract, but in Turkey people identify it as a shopping mall, not as something abstract. It is the consumer culture, global capitalism, and it's nearby. At first people were very happy, and now there is a kind of saturation. It's everywhere. They don't have space of encounter. They don't have a space for oxygen, and it is the shopping mall. But then they started to find out that at that very place of the city, there was an Ottoman barracks, military barracks. So Erdogan started saying, we're going to reconstruct these Ottoman barracks as it was. People said these were horribly ugly. We don't want Ottoman military barracks in the midst of our city. And again, this is now, and then people said there was a Armenian cemetery. The past starts coming to the surface, Armenian cemetery. And then there were Jewish intellectuals in many parts of the world, Paris and New York, started writing, this was our neighborhood. We were raised in this park. And they were putting their pictures. So suddenly all this cosmopolitan, multi-layered memories was coming to the public space. So we say space is never a void space, as Henri Lefebvre would say. And already we are in politics of memory. And who will now, with what kind of a marker that we will give a new identity to this space? In the Erdogan government, it is more like neo-Ottoman reconstructions, okay, because there's no more Ottoman. They reconstructed in a way. This Ottoman military barracks is a neo-Ottoman. But what he didn't think was going also, the other memories were going to pop up and come to the surface. So public space, public place democracy, as you see, it's not, even if it's at this moment, there is this already temporality in the past also that can come in relation to this space. And that brings us to the idea of the right to city of Harvey. It's a very important article in the 60s, I think, no? The right to city. So these are movements who really claim the right to the city. It's not against speculators, against also political power who control it. It's the citizens who want to have another imagination, in a way, to the right to the city. Now, I said occupation is not the right word. When we make surveys in Spain, it is Pablo Uziel, our colleague, has said in the they were saying we are not occupying, because occupying movements mean something else: squattering, having the property of a place, of a void apartment. In this case, they were saying we are camping, and I think it's not bad if they are camping. And but there is this sustained, persistent presence, which is interesting. Okay, they don't leave it; they come. In the case of Tahrir Square, we were bewildered by this persistent, sustainable presence. Whatever comes, we are here. We are the citizens. We make ourselves visible to power, but also to each other. They were saying we are, even in numbers, we are more than what we have thought. So this sustained presence, but also with the civic disobedience, because being there, camping or occupying the public space, is a kind of civic disobedience. In spite of the police confrontation, everywhere there was a terrible confrontation, use of disproportionate police power and violence. In the Turkish case, Gezi, movements spread out from Istanbul to almost every Turkish city. People started to go, because when the police intervened in the camps, destroyed it, put under fire, then the middle classes joined the movement. I will call it the elders, the fathers and the mothers of the people came into the movement. This is not a youth movement only, like in the 68. There are some elements of 68, but this is not a youth movement against the elder generational values. On the contrary, there was a kind of solidarity between generations. And women were also participating sometimes from the kitchens, like in, I think it was basically in Latin American countries, in Brazil, with what we call these, with casseroles from the kitchen making noise, or putting bougies, candles, thank you, candles. So there were many different ways, performative ways of participating, but from all over Turkey, in each city, I think one city only exempt, I don't know why, people were in the avenues and city centers, and they were, when it was during the evening, they were coming out. It was like a social event. So at the end, the violence was quite important. And today, so there are dozens of people who were killed, many people who lost their eyes, and with gas bombs. And the criminalization continues. There are trials against those who were participating, and especially by judicial means, but also by giving a different narrative. And I think that's also in our democracies is very important. It's not like the propaganda of a communist country. Now it is a really battleground for who is going to give meaning, who will give the narration of these movements. And for the moment, that's why we have to continue to work and publish. And for the moment, AKP, the government, Erdogan, they said this. First, they tried to have a reconciliation, and then he believed that this was a conspiracy against them. Okay, conspiracy movement, kind of insurrection, And he established a parallel with the overthrow of Muslim Brotherhood government in Egypt, because we had two Tahrir Square movements. Tahrir for Arab Spring, and then Tahrir who wanted to get rid of the Muslim government. So he said, and now this is the Sisi military, civic appearance, civic uniform military government in Egypt. So he made this association in Turkey, and this was the first time the Turkish elites are identifying themselves with the Egyptian situation. And this was, you can call it, persecution or paranoid, but anyhow, narrative of insurrection manipulated by foreign and domestic enemies of AKP power. Now this brings us back to the problem of mistrust of also the society at large to these movements sometimes. And they can use that mistrust because these people are belonging to the different publics at the same time. There is this multicultural element in these publics. Suddenly they would say, oh, they were linked to United States in the Tahrir Square movement, for instance, because people were in social media. And they were saying, oh, they were in relation to American citizens or American-based Egyptians. So that creates suspicion, mistrust. But that brings, again, as I said, publics can be much more multicultural than national politics. So he played the nationalist card against that. Another element is actors, question of legitimacy. And this is also relevant for all social movements. Feminists know it very well. When you start a non-conformist action, when you are not a conformist citizen, let's say, conformist citizen, and you become active, all kinds of names are attached to your movement. For feminists, it was all the horrible words. And for these movements as well, they do not have the legitimacy of citizens protesting in the public sphere. Okay, it's not like sociology books. It is like either conspiracy people, but also he used words to put them down, like rakai, marginal rakai. I used it in English. I forgot. Yeah, exactly. Bandits and so on. And in Turkish, çapulcu. I have forgotten this word, çapulcu. It sounds like çapulcu, those who are, not respectful citizens. Okay, and so this is important. Also, you're not recognized as citizens in the public sphere. In a way, you are not welcomed and you're not legitimate. On the contrary, you are already from the first day. There is not only mistrust, but you are an outsider. And now protesters turn this stigmat, this reversal of stigmat, like in the Irving Goffman case, into their advantage, into a playful game. So this became the hashtag of the movement. Everyone was calling himself çapulcu. And they were using also the word as grammatically as a verb. We are doing çapulculuk, çapuling, and I'll show you. And it became a kind of positive identity. So everyone was saying, instead of Nilüfer Göle, çapulcu Nilüfer Göle, okay, çapulcu boyancı Ohridski. So the movement doesn't have identity, like in the case of civil society movements, as you see. So these are not identitarian movements. So they play with this identity. And so it became a çapulcu movement. Okay? And secondly, the movement, because it doesn't create identity or the claims before coming to the public square, it is the public square that transforms the very experience. I mentioned experience also in the public life of John Dewey. The very experience of being in the public sphere gives you a different kind of identity and relation with others. It has a transformative effect. And you can see it. People who have been there and those who were not there, there's an enormous difference. Those who really participated think this was a very important moment of their life. And it had a transformative effect on them before and after. And also they experienced the multiculturalism or the others, the social heterogeneity as they have never experienced before. Again, in our conference, there was an Egyptian artist, Copt, Christian origin. She said, for the first time in my life, I encountered Muslims because before, during this Tahrir Square movement, because before I was in my neighborhood only among Copts and in the church. So between my church and neighborhood, I never met other citizens of Egypt, Muslims. So this was a kind of, and she was saying this as a very important moment, celebration of differences. In the Turkish case, this was also very important. Celebration of differences and elaborating new forms of togetherness. I call it co-citizenship. This co-citizenship is really very important. I give one example outside Turkey. It is in the aftermath of attacks in Paris, the first attacks, Charlie Hebdo and Kosher Market attacks, in different, because European countries, in Oslo, in cities, Muslims gathered together around a synagogue and created a human chain to defend, to protect the synagogue. This is co-citizenship. For the first time, they became aware of the presence of each other. And that was a performative citizenship, performative act. Okay, this is also public place movement. It's not only protest, but how you come into the public, how around a synagogue you express your co-citizenship in a performative way. There's no speaking. We are not in a discursive public sphere. We are in a performative public sphere. Here I am coming. So these are new forms of agency. So who are these people? As I said, this is not civil society, but we can understand it from maybe the motto of feminism. Personal is public. You remember the motto of feminism. Personal is political, personal is public. Because things that are personal should come out to political realm. Things that were suppressed, thought as a taboo, should come out into the public sphere. So there is this movement from the private to the public, which characterizes this movement. That's why there is something of public agency, which is not like a collective action. The nature of public agency brings this private, personal realm into the public. Okay? So the way of being in collectivity is different. It's not mass, because everyone has a face and has a name. I remember I was following the movement from Facebook and Twitter. This is the first time I came to social media, because really movement could have been followed by these media. And they were putting all the time films, videos, those who were already in the protest, not afterwards, during the moment, simultaneously. Again, the temporality is interesting. And saying always, I am this person and I am in the public sphere for this reason. Some of them were ecologists. Some of them had a better future, would like to have this future. Some were all from different backgrounds, from different civil society movements or other things, or nothing. As persons, they were in the public square. That's important. Not as a, and they became a collectivity in the public square. So now they were basically white-collar people, in almost, not those who were maybe the most marginalized, but white-collar. This is a very American language, but well, I don't know, white-collar, we understand, middle classes. I call them more educated, like in the case of 70s peace movements and so on. That's definitely sure. But there were among them football supporters, not that much white color, all kinds of football supporters. And we see that also in Brazil. I don't know in here, but in Tahrir Square as well. Lots of feminists and homosexuals. And in Turkey, LGBTI. How many of you know how to open this horrible block? I learned it from my students. Some of them can go until LGB. Lesbian, where I am. Lesbian, bisexual, gay, transsexual, intersex. That's the new thing. So that became also widely used term. and hackers. I like hackers. So we have different kinds of actors, you see. Football supporters, they're all in the same public square. I choose some. LGBT, feminists and homosexuals, young, white-collar Turks, rather educated, and hackers. Hackers, like, it's interesting because hacker activists, hacktivism they called it, a student of mine, hacktivism. And this is important because so each of them were having a different kind of action. For instance, supporters of football teams were the ones who really created the barricades and the physical confrontation, violence with the police, because they know that. Okay, they were at the forefront, and they loved it. And then feminists were very important to control the public language, sexist public language, especially in confrontation with police. Always all these wordings against using mothers and women and, sexist language. And homosexuals was very important in the movement. I don't have enough images. It's a pity. Because they put it in derision. They played with machist action, even leftist action, and so on. So they were making action, but also with perukes and with wigs, and saying, oh, we came because we think there's an opera or something, playing and making fun, humor. Humor was really very important. So emotional repertoire of these movements are important. And there are different emotions at different times. So at the peak of the movement, it was joy and humor, use of humor and joy as a power, as a resistance, power of resistance. But then, after violence and then moments of tristesse, sadness, and moments of frustration, despair at the end. So there are different, I think emotions are also very important to understand. But what characterized the movement is joy and humor, I would say. And there were also, sorry, I forgot, non-capitalist, anti-capitalist Muslims. That was another. You see, hacktivists, LGBT, all kinds of different, really, I call them active minorities, in a way. Those who do not recognize themselves in the mass majority narration of a nation, in a way. Because in this AKP government created a kind of good citizens, maybe bad citizens, or majority rule, kind of tyranny of the majority in a way, and those who are not recognizing themselves as Sunni, Muslim, AKP, but what I call active minorities. Active because it is, they are not only minority in terms of numbers, but they make their minor politics, in the sense that it is the politics of the minor. So based upon this minority situation, as in relation to anti-conformist definitions of citizenship, they make it a force. So all these people, so non-capitalist, anti-capitalist Muslims was very important. This is the first time because there is a kind of, I should go, okay, we have still time? I'm coming to the end. It is important because, again, they were differentiating themselves from the from the government, who was quite successful economically, but it is critical for these Muslims, saying that this is not what we wanted. So you are becoming just capitalist, but hiding it with faith and Islam. And empathy with each other was very important. As I said, co-citizenship. So co-citizenship between secular and religious, because anti-capitalists were there, but also especially with Kurds, Kurdish and what we call white Turks, or established white-collar Turks are, you can take it in two senses, white color, but also white Turks who are not Kurdish, who are not defining themselves as religious and so on. They had really empathy with Kurds, and a lot of the Kurdish language is used on the public square and so on. So I would say one aspect is performative, because all these empathies are used by language, by dancing, by ways of performative action. I'll show it. Visual art, another aspect, very important. Visual art, all this kind of unleashment of creativity, I would say, during the public space movement. Lots of music created for the public protest movement, for Meydan, dancing, improvised, and visual arts. And I think the piano is also used in Turkey. Piano is icon. So there is also circulation of democratic imaginaries between places. They take some of the archetypes, like piano or anonymous, some of the objects, and some of the visual dimensions, modes of address, also in some places. So I think there is also this transversal dimension of the public, what I call public space democracy. It's getting more. And they circulate these imaginaries and performative rituals. They circulate from one place to another. They reiterate, in a way. It doesn't mean that it is only contagious. They take it consciously and they reiterate it. And in a way, they have a solidarity with other pieces. Again, in our conference, it was very interesting. Japan, Japanese society, after the nuclear catastrophe and the Fukushima, they what did I say? Fukushima. I'm sorry. They made this movement again, persistence in relation to the Ministry of what was it? The kind of to power government, and they linked themselves with the Tunisian revolution. Tunisian. So the word revolution for me, for instance, I have never thought for these movements, the revolution, but from the Japanese perspective, revolution became something else. And for them, and they were taking Yasmin revolution, although the Tunisians were critical about it, yes, the flower, and they have called their own revolution hortensia. So this is another way of reiterating the idea of the civic disobedience, public protest against the politics, develop an energy politics of the Japanese government, and yet using the archetype of another country, very far away, Tunisian revolution, and its archetype of the flower becoming also, in a different way, the Japanese revolution, hortensia. Hortensia is the name of the flower. I'll show you some visuals before this debating. This will be the end. So this was just gave one of the books because the title is so telling. Paul Masson, Jacobins with laptops. Okay, so to characterize, I don't know why he calls them Jacobins, because Jacobin I'm sure in the Bulgarian context, like in the Turkish context, it means these from top to bottom. So this is from bottom to top movements. So for me, they are not Jacobin at all in my own referential system, not at all. But laptops, okay, these are therefore people always in the social media and so on. European, he calls it European youth revolts. I don't agree with any of them because it's not only European, it's also Egyptian, it is also Bulgarian. I mean, Bulgaria maybe is more European, but there are degrees. It's also in different parts of the world. And it's not, as I said, youth revolt, but it's a different kind of citizens manifesting themselves. And since the economic crisis, I don't know. Okay, so, but it is important, looks at the causes and aftermaths of the occupation of squares movements and the democratic consent gap in the EU. What was interesting is why it is kicking off everywhere, the new global revolutions. Okay, so there's something that spreads out globally, and there is, what he says in the book is interesting, a new subject after the proletariat, after the working class. For the first time, there's a new subject that is emerging. And I think that is interesting, how we define this new subject now. So this is 2013 when the gathering in Gezi, and you see all Taksim Square to Gezi to protest movements. This is the 12th day already, and you see all this leftist also movements trying to take over. The posters are very extreme leftist movement, really from the 70s. And this is a very, I think, good picture that shows you how much they are civic, they are not militants. The kind of crowd and the police, how they attack them midday. They are really vulnerable, I would say they are vulnerable publics in a way. And this is also very typical. Social media under all circumstances. So police is attacking, but they are already communicating it. And the mask against gas is also another object that we have seen almost in every movement, from Tahrir to Lebanon lately, and in Beirut. So the gas mask is important. That's what I was saying. Every day I'm çapulin. You remember çapulcu? And they played a language game, and this is how also they communicate beyond the Turkish national community language. You see, this is also the way it becomes totally transgressive and transnational, because every day I am çapulin, that is I am protesting. So they introduce a Turkish word into English, and then they bring their singularity, and si avec cedi also, it's very difficult in English, and so it became a neologism. And I think someone in the television show asked to people, what is çapulin, and he lost his job. So media. And this is Noam Chomsky. This is, you see, transnational publics. And he participated to the movement from distance, calling, I'm also a çapulcu. And in solidarity with Istanbul. This became the icon, picture of the movement, red-dressed girl. And we figured out that she was a teaching assistant in the urban planning department of Istanbul Technical University. This shows very well the kind of people there, one of them. And this use of, and I think all the posture, you can read this. This is really, again, vulnerable. And she's not having this body language that we used to have in the 70s, you know, like more leftist movement, resist. This is much more passive resistance. And and this is exactly what I was saying, the visual posters, and they are saying, more you gas us, more we are becoming bigger. We are becoming bigger. So, and this I like very much. As I'm saying, humor and everything private and personal. This is women's bra, for those who didn't see it. Underwear in the public, and as a gas mask. You see the really, many elements are there. And this is, again, someone who is always there in every movement, anonymous. And this also I have seen in many different parts. And they created in the public square in Meydan a library. It was really like not only camping, but a different communitarian community, kind of community. And there are things written that there was no money, they were solidarity, eating. It was like a kind of utopia, realized utopia on the on Meydan. And again, Çapulcu Kütüphanesi, it is the library of Çapulcu, and özgür kitaplar, meaning free books. And this idea of library is also interesting because, again, for culture against consumption culture, and so it's important, the defense. Chess, it looks very peaceful. Now this is the kind of dancing and performative. This is dervish tourneur, dervish dancers. And again, the use of the gas mask with this He's a real performer, you can see. And this means also, Mevlana, come, whoever you are, come. I would say he performs almost the Meydan movement because it's circulary. And the way he turns, he also brings everyone together. And there was really, you see another turning dervish with Gezi. Yeah. Sen de gel means you also come and join us. And yogi, this is really global culture. They are doing yoga. You are not astonished in the public square. I don't have the... Yeah. And this became very important icon, Duran Adam, standing man. This was after the repression of the movement. He came into the center of the Taksim Park and he started just to not to move. After 7 hours, police came. They started to see what he had. People were gathering all around him, and he was still there. Of course, to be still like him, you need to be an artist. You cannot keep still. He didn't really move. He was a performance artist. And this really characterized the civil pacifist resistance of the movement. And then this became a poster of the movement. Keep calm and stand up. Keep calm and stand up. So as you see, there is no reaction as a violence, but always this way of being there, sustainably there, being present, and even after the repression, one single person. We start from the person, these movements. And again, this shows, and then it spread out, this mode of resisting, standing up. And I think this could have been also in Bulgaria, in Ukraine. And this is like the generations, mothers and the daughters. And this continued as forums. And these were modes of address. They also took it from some American ways, not to disturb the neighborhood. They were trying to find ways of communication silently. These forums were trying to find out some kind of direct democracy, but it wasn't very sustainable at the end. This trying to find a kind of translation into politics. But they created a lot of forums in every neighborhood. It spread out. So it's kind of agora, la cité, this Greek agora kind of thing. Every neighborhood. And this is the way I was speaking about. These are anti-capitalist Muslims praying in the public square. And the others, I don't have this picture, but others were keeping, when it was raining, keeping an umbrella. So this is the kind of empathy. And this, during a religious holiday, very important holiday, they made this peace movement. But this peace movement is also like simit. You must have something like this bread in Turkey, this like pretzel, same, like kandil that we distribute during this religious holiday. And they said, during this day, these are peace people, you can see, these are secular background people, no alcohol, no confrontation, no bad words, no provocation, no violence, but respect, peace, praying, action, and the holiday gâteau, simit, pretzel. And this another, I found this movement very interesting. This was initiated by anti-capitalist Muslims because after the repression of the movement, it was the Ramadan month. And again, this is very performative and co-citizenship in a way, because they made the fast-breaking meals. This is all in Beyoğlu, Pera, the whole street. And this was on the street, whereas the government was having these fast-breaking meals, but all distributed from catering, industrial food. And here they were on the street, and they all brought food from home, solidarity. And some people were saying they haven't been fasting, these people, you can see with shorts and so on. They just came for the fast-breaking meal. that's the co-citizenship, that's the performative thing. And to look at it, this is the very huge, like this on the street. And this is important. We have seen it in Tahrir Square as well, how after the manifestations, they were cleaning up the public square, saying that this is our city and it's not like a mass movement and so on. I finish. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your speech. That was so rich and pointing out to so many dimensions of the Gezi Park protests. So you mentioned, so there was the political dimension, the economic and social dimension, the religious dimension, and the cultural dimensions. It is really interesting how these dimensions coexisted and how they were related or referring to each other. And of course, your introduction to the problems of the civic, of the new protest movements, it was also very, for me, very interesting. Mainly with this difference between the performative public space and discourse public sphere, between the old or the classical social movements and the new protest movements, and this special accent on emphasis on the personal presence of the people. So they were not there as part of collectives, they were there as individuals, as persons who, however, participated in a collective action. I think it is very important because there was this difference. Even authors like Ernesto Laclau, who was defining two logics. There was the logic of the differential logic. People are different. They have their interests, and they fused in the people. So you have the people or the individuals. And I think so. What you described is completely different. It is going beyond this logic. So we had also protests in Bulgaria, and they were also very precious for us. We were very passionate for them, and maybe they didn't have so many. They didn't play so many roles. And in Bulgaria, we have 2 protests or 3 protests in the same year. So some people, we have the winter protests and the summer protests and the student occupations. So all these aspects in Bulgaria were analytically divided or separated, and there were some kind of opposition between the winter protests, which called social protests, and the summer protests called moral protests. Some people regretted about this opposition, but I don't want to monopolize the public space. I will give immediately the floor to the public, so you have the possibility to ask your questions to Professor Gole. So I see Milena Yakimova and Momchil Christoph.
Thank you, first of all. I think it's a marvelous way to end up our series of seminars and discussions. And I'm very curious, when we have this transversality of those new movements, when we have all this personal presence and co-citizenship and so on, how does this transformation relates to the issues of governmentality and democracy? Because this was what you started with, telling that we have to revisit the relation between public sphere. How do you think these transversal modalities of camping in public spheres structurally change in public spaces? How does the space change the sphere? And how this change, the structural change of the sphere, then refers back to the issue of democracy? Is anti-capitalist, for example, movement democratic or irrelevant to democracy or anti-democratic? This is probably more than one question, but I'm very interested.
Okay, maybe we will have just yes, we will. collect 3 questions.
Thank you. Thank you for your lecture. Well, first of all, a short remark. It was about the fact that you said, as far as I understood, that those who protested in this Gezi movement were the whites, and they were at the same time the minorities, several minorities. Well, I mean, my reflex is to say to myself, well, if the whites are minority in Turkey, well, it's a good thing, actually. But probably it's not the case. And the question is, how do these protesting minorities define this so-called silent, totally controlled by Tayyip Erdogan majority? Were there any? What was the imagery of the protest about the majority, about those who didn't go to protest for the party, about those who, I mean, the others? Who were the others to these protesters? Like, were they designated as blacks, black Turks? Because in Bulgaria, I mean, the case was very interesting. We had the summer protests, but also these so-called counter-protests, which were almost immediately recognized by the protesters, by the summer protesters, as Roma and Turkish people who didn't even speak Bulgarian, and who were bussed, they said, who were brought with buses into the capital in Sofia. So they were very racialized, stigmatizing, imagery of this of those who didn't protest. Okay,
yes. I should.
Myself.
You want to continue?
Yes, to continue. And the final question, Dimitar Vatsov.
Thank you very much. I like very much the way you outlined the main features of the protests of Gezi, in Gezi party especially, but contemporary protests at all. Especially the performative character of the protest is something that is very close to my understanding for these events. But what is unclear for me is, if we accept it, I accept that there is something as a new performative public sphere, but what is the connection of this new performative public sphere to the representational democracy? This is in direct link with Mila's question, with the ways of governmentality in the contemporary world. Here I see three general options. I could imagine that the performative public sphere could be only subversive to the representational procedures and to the representational democracy. Reiterating only figures that are cleared from any power, from any kind of power, because in Occupy, but also in Sofia and in other places, there are some claims that all the relations in the protest should be symmetrical without any representation, any leaders, and so on. The second possible option to my mind is...
Can you come back to that? I didn't understand. You mean...
the first option is that the protests are only subversive to the representational democracy, to the representational form of governmentality. The second option could be something like Rosan Vallon's idea, that protests should be thought as something complementary to the representational democracy. Counter-democracy is a corrective to the representational democracy in Rosan Vallon's terms. And maybe third option could be marked by something that is only in a state of initiation in the last books of Nancy Fraser, that the protests, because they are global, because they collectively global resistance, should be represented in a new way through global procedures of framing and representation beyond the national state. I see these three general options, but please explain how could you posit your position here? Thank you.
Thank you. So.
Thank you. I start from your question because I think it is because I don't have an answer, and you already gave answers. I thank you. I think there is because I think your questions they converge in a way because how these movements are related to governments. First, I think for the moment there is a discrepancy. These movements are appearing something that the governments are not taking into account. So this is very important. There is this Rosan Ballon's corrective contribution of these movements to representative democracies failed. I could have thought like that, but I didn't understand why, for instance, Erdogan was reacting so radically, because there is something which is not, which cannot be explained. Because on the one hand, he was almost saying these are little, several marginal people, innocent, kind of wishing greens, ecology movements. So, and then on the other hand, conspiracy theory. So there's a problem of situating these movements as making part of the politics already. So they are not totally accepted, and they are not making this kind of corrective role. In the case even, I don't know, in European cases, indignatos maybe. Yeah, so to what extent the politicians will take this into their agendas, we can think like this. In the Turkish case, the Kurdish movement, the leader of the Kurdish party, Selahattin Demirtas, the elections before this summer gained a lot of popularity, and I thought, and I've written, and so many others made the same observation, that he translated this paradigm that appeared on the Maidan to his politics, even including first of all, this recognition of differences. So he started to speak to society and minorities, all differences, speaking of also homosexuals, lesbians, and in a way. But it's not like this, the American politics of recognition of difference, okay? So it's saying that our identity, we're not making identity politics, but we are celebrating these differences. It's different. And humor, using a lot of humor and art and so on. So this was one way. Politicians can take it into their agendas. And we have seen it. When they take it into their agendas, they can be empowered also. But it is not directly, these movements can become political. I don't see any possibility. And subversive, I think there is a subversive element because they make appear new actors also. People who are not taken in the discourse, in the narrative of the nation. So in that sense, I call active minorities. So I come to this second question. So my response to you is, I think it's really, for the moment, they are making appear another paradigm that cannot be taken by representative democracy. What kind of format it can come? Maybe phrases is not that, it is imaginative, something beyond nation state, it's true. But I myself also can think of it only as this form, like a creative form, like a theatricality, which is sufficient for me. I don't look for it as something political. But the issue is how this will be linked, because apparently all these movements nevertheless made a big difference. Because why then political powers will react so radically in a way? So there is something at stake there. But I don't know how the representative democracy and these movements will speak to each other. We don't know yet. But it is a big question. Coming to my take on it is related with minorities. Minorities in the sense, you can be a majority, yes, not recognizing yourself in that government. The government can be, representing the minority, but you yourself think that, I think in Ukraine that was the case also. In Ukraine, Maidan movements, people didn't find themselves, recognize themselves in the discourse, in the narrative. And in the case of Turkey, you said it, well, you seem to know well Turkey, because to say that if white Turks are feeling themselves minority, that's a good thing. I think that's very relevant and appropriate to understand the Turkish Kemalist elites. That's what we mean by white, that is Western-oriented, secular, and more West-looking than East-looking. So even Kurdish, but they are assimilated Kurds, and so white Turk meaning this established elites in a way. But today they are in minority since the government of AKP. Things change. This is more than 15 years now. They are in minority, both in political terms. The political party that can represent these classes are not gaining elections, winning elections, but also in the sense that they started to be normal citizens, and that's a good thing. Okay, what you say is, this is a good thing because they are not the privileged citizens having state power behind them. They became citizens and they manifest also. But these people, that was the difference from the previous generations. In that sense, they are not that white Turk of the established white Turk, but more white collar, and not white color in that sense, because they do recognize, they have empathy with Kurds and religious. So they are not in this divide, polarization between religious and secular. Now, the key word is the polarization. Governments, AKP uses polarization. Russia uses polarization. Neo-populist governments, politics uses polarization. These movements are recognizing each other. They're trying to have transversal relations. And these white-collar groups were in co-citizenship with religious. That's what I tried to show. So in that sense, this was a very important move in relation to AKP and Erdogan, who thought they were going beyond religious secular, but they were the polarizers. Okay? So they were not, because white Turks were part of the polarization, but not in this movement. Okay? So that's why I brought in the Kurdish issue. For the first time, many nationalist Turks who were coming from secular background became very sensitive to Kurdish issue in the last. And also one should remind that it is AKP government who started the peace movement with Kurdish issue. It is also during the AKP government the taboos on Armenian genocide was falling, and we were speaking. So there was a lot of emancipatory potential of the AKP government and much more pluralistic, but it is shrinking. And Gezi movement became a turning point of changing. And they were representing now a majority, a kind of homogeneous majority. So this majority democracies cannot take into consideration these movements. That's why I call this active minorities, because I don't find any other better term. It is Serge Moscovici, social psychologist, who have developed this term. I like it very much. It is active minority, meaning you are not assigned as a minority, but you yourself also take some of these homosexual movements. These are active minority movements. They claim their differences. Feminists are active minorities, used to be, no more. They were claiming their differences. And these white Turks also now becoming like active minorities. But not against religious people. That's why they were together. Saying that we don't want only one narration of nationhood. There are many different voices. This is more Hannah Arendt, multiplicity in that sense. A new kind of pluralism, I would say. Did I answer you? No, that was one very important issue. Blacks. Who are the blacks then? Now, it used to be religious, but religious are no longer black, they are gray because they are transformed with power. Embourgeoisement, we used to call I mean, Erdogan, they are the new elites. First ladies are the ones who are covered with hijab. So, who are the black people now? And in that respect, something happened. AKP, Erdogan mobilized alternative manifestations, demonstrations. It is very much like what you have said. And these alternative demonstrations were party members, like coming with buses and so on, and much more lumpen proletariat again, as we call, like Erdogan lovers and whatever. So there is, I think, the people on the public square, I don't know if they had any imagery about them. But I think there is a real issue also because some of the people who were killed among the protesters were killed by this kind of new nationalist Erdogan, pro-Erdogan people. They are not really very, we don't know how to, it's like deep state elements. Okay, so it is very important what you say is how these movements are in counter distinction with other parts of the society. Who are the others? Not only who are not manifesting, but also who are against them, who are mistrusting them, and can be mobilized against them. Okay, and this will be a major cleavage in our societies. And again, inside, outside will be a very major issue, I think. Who makes part of the national community? And who are those people who are like traitors, who are conspiracy, they have different linkages, multiple belongings, and so on. I myself become a bit target like that in today's Turkey, saying, aha, she is, who is she? You know, from where, to whom you belong. So in that sense, there is some kind of, that's why I said at the beginning, there is non-correspondence between representative democracy today and what they bring as a paradigm into the surface. One more thing, what she asked at the beginning, is anti-capitalist movements are relevant in this transversality? What is relevant? Okay, this is, I think I answered to the governmentality because I don't think there is direct linkage between the two. But what is relevant? I think they bring in different agendas in democracy, different agendas, like maybe questions that cannot be treated by nation states. That's why this global transversality is important. Environmental, climatic, migrant issues, this will be more and more important. And this pluralism. And also anti-capitalism will be very important because at the end it will be the right to the city. So it is right to the city. That is the claim for the right to the city will be very important as well, which will bring this more capitalist dimension, private confiscation of the spaces, because we need these spaces. Who will give us these spaces? So the space really matters. So there is this anti-capitalist dimension in these movements. If they can continue to exist, because the repression is so bad. That's why I say it is the vulnerable spot of democracy. Is so bad that nobody will come to the public square anymore without fear. And I didn't mention, but I always remember, and I owe a kind of going back and revisiting Tiananmen. I owe as it's our debt to bring back Tiananmen to our debates, because this maybe is genealogically it is Tiananmen. And the moment we thought it was opening up, it opened up capitalist-wise, the government, the power, but now nobody can go back to the public square. And I'm scared it's the same in Turkey, it's the same in Tahrir. So that's a bad note, but...
Now we have two questions. Elitsa Stanova, Dejan Kuranov.
I'll be shorter then.
So we have, there is the next round of questions. So, Elitsa?
Thank you for your talk. You've mentioned that those protests had not just a spatial dimension, but also a different temporality compared to the political temporality. So I'm wondering, how does this extend beyond the protest itself? I mean, this co-citizenship that you talked about, like in the example of the Egyptian Copt woman and her first encounter with Muslims. And going back to what you said at the beginning, when you, and I very much agree with that, when you said that we should distance the protests themselves from their political outcomes, but how about their civic outcomes? Where do you identify those outcomes?
Thank you.
Dejan Kuranov.
Professor Gole, you mentioned 10 on 1. I wonder, shouldn't we bring into the line also Paris 68? Because I remember seeing footage, documentary from Gezi Square, and there was a close-up of a young person sitting against a tree reading Jean-Paul Sartre, of all people. And I thought, oh, they're having their 68 now. Is that correct, in some sense? And if so, is there a big difference between Paris 68 and, for that matter, the American student uprisings, the Yugoslav student uprising, the German student uprisings, and this new global revolution that's apparently kicking off? Okay.
Thank you.
And last question? No.
Professor Gole, thank you very much for your very interesting speech, talk. I have 3 questions actually. The first of them is: do you think that after Gezi Park, LGBTQI society community gained more visibility of their issues in Turkey?
Which community?
LGBTQI.
Hi. Okay. QI.
Queer and
Queer. Yes. Thank you.
Do you think that the participation of famous people like we saw Nilüfer Göle, we saw Kurel, we also saw the Koch family also supported in some kind of the protest, helped for the movement to extend, to be more famous, more popular? And my third question is that do you think that Gezi Park created the trend to use social media in a way to express your how can I say it, protest or reaction to the government? Because we had, after that, we had this Topla Bacakları campaign and so far, and so on.
What campaign?
Topla Bacakları. It was in, for example, it was in the metro when men were sitting with their feet on, you know, how they sit, and women should put their feet together, their legs, not their feet. And after, for example, Bülent Arınç, he said that women should not laugh in public, and then women started posting on Instagram and Twitter, started posting pictures how they laugh, and about this every day I'm chapeling. After it was they made this video, because at that time it was a very famous song, Today I'm Chapeling, and they just turned chapeling into chapeling, and there were a lot of music said about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You should have come with me and contribute, because she made very important comments. She knows it from inside almost.
Okay, thank you. So
I can go. Thank you very much for these really all more than questions, all contributions to pursue the reflection. First, temporality. Who has the? Thank you, Elitse. The temporality is very important. It is. You're right. It continued. I give one example. It is during the elections, so it gave rise to other movements. And during the elections, the surveillance of the voting process was very important, so that there will be no trichery, no fraud. No fraud. And there was a very important oy ve ötesi, voting and beyond. So to control in every ballot box, they were organized, all the same kind of people, all across Turkey, from during the elections, and they really surveyed. And this was like a civil societal movement coming out of Gezi. This was one of the most important movements that really made a difference in politics. So they were not a political party, but it was a kind of buffer zone for a good representative politics. That comes, although I said it is not possible, I'm more radical in thinking, but Rosanvallo's corrective thing. So it was correcting the representative democracy in ways of controlling in case there is fraud or not. And this really gave a lot of confidence for voters in Turkey against rumors and so on. Second one is 68. You are absolutely right. 68, the soul of the 68 was there, and the references. And also that shows how much these movements, maybe we shouldn't think politically, but culturally. They create a different public culture. Why? Because 68 movement created a countercultural movement that still is there. Maybe it's only now that it is ending, in a way. But 68 movement also has kind of experience together, and also a kind of community, creating a new community outside the circles of established power games and so on. And so it is true that the reference was there, and people were saying this is like 68. Joy was there, but not only as a youth movement, and not only as different norms, because 68 also there was this huge energy, and that was released from the movement. And also after 68 it continued. So feminist movement became also part of it afterwards, and what we call counterculture. It is the effect of 68, and it changed politics, but it didn't become a political movement. Again, maybe we can ask the same question of 68 movement with representative democracy. What happened? How we see it, apart from de Gaulle, end of Vietnam War, how we see it. It will be very interesting. And what you said about, thank you for the last point, disciplinary practices in public, Muslim kind of, that's also this majority, how to behave in public, what kind of lifestyle, do you smoke, do you especially drink alcohol, are you hands in hands, you permit me, in public, and in mixity. These are all we know agendas of a Islamic government in a way. And in Turkey for the last 15 years, they couldn't put this on the agenda in the society. They couldn't really impose these norms. But they make these moves. And again, these people resist. And after Gezi, it became much easier, because these people who do not recognize themselves in these religious engineering of the public life, now they can voice it by a movement. So in a way, this is why active white minorities is important, because they do, not as secularists, but they represent, they say, you cannot intervene in my lifestyle. So the lifestyle is very important. From the very beginning, when I was writing on Islam, this was years ago, I started saying secularism and Islam, they are fighting for lifestyles. And nobody took me seriously, because people were really working on the Islamic revolutions, Islamization from below, Islamization from above. These were the political scientist language, very hard facts. And I always liked the more, how can I say, amorphous and difficult to name social phenomena. And at that time I said, this is about lifestyles. Mixity, non-mixity, women in public, how to be in public, and what kind of, what part of the body should be shown in public or not. These are all very important issues, since not only in the Muslim majority countries, but always in every society, what part of how we laugh in public and so on. So the disciplinary practices of the Islamic governmentality is very important in If you have been to Iran, you can see it. In the public life, you can see it. And they play with it, with showing little part of their hair. Some people were saying these are homeopathic differences, homeopathic resistance. That is just very little getting shorter, some kind of fringe of the hair from here and so on. They're playing with their... So the body politics becomes very important in this public sphere, lifestyle and body politics. Just one word about more visibility. People who backed up, who understood Gezi, and those who reacted, created in Turkey such an important cleavage today. It is still there. That's also very important. So it's not only representative democracy, but it changed the whole configuration of the public relations. Among us intellectuals, there's an enormous split. With my friends, we were sharing the same tables, same panels, no more. Those who were against Gezi and those like me who tried to understand Gezi, they cannot come together anymore. So therefore there's something playing there very deep, okay? Not only around the power, but there is something very deep split among the business class, because Koç family, one of the richest entrepreneurial family, they opened up the Divan Hotel, the doors, to those who were trying to find refuge in the hotel coming from the police violence. They were condemned. But what happened? After so many years, the family member, the head of the Koç family, a young 50-year-old son, the head of the family, Koç, Mustafa Koç, who lost his life with a heart attack a month ago. He was a very discreet guy who liked to do rather sports, all kinds of dangerous sports. He preferred his private life, but also he managed quite well the Koç family, who is still the biggest family, and very secular. That is the white Turk, coming to my friend's white Turk, but not the state-backed up white Turk, businessman, Western outlook and so on. He became his funerai after his death. He became a kind of visiting of the civil society. All kinds of people, all kinds of... We didn't understand. There's an issue. What is the issue? What is expressed around him? Gezi played a role. People said, this guy is with us. But who is this with? Okay, he's a capitalist businessman, but he looks more secular-oriented, but not secularist with the state power. And very animal-loving, sports-loving. People like Gezi. You're right. So things, and people were saying the phantom of Gezi is there. I think we should also see it more in these terms. I am still very amorphous, you see. I believe in amorphous kinds of presences, like rather than representative democracy ballot. This is a joke, but these are presences that change the public field of confrontation, new cleavages. I am, for instance, really targeted, since I have written a series of articles on Gezi, by the AKP intelligentsia as the traitor. It is just articles about Gezi. It's very interesting. I couldn't imagine such a thing, because it is not political. You hear me? I mean, it's not political kind of statement. Just sociologically sensitive articles, trying to understand, to name it. I am an outcast. So there is something playing out there that we have to understand much more. And in Egypt, it's a tragedy. It's totally oppressed and finished and hijacked. And so it's not only some little young people trying to have their retarded 68 ecology with ecology sensibility. It is something deep is playing out there.
So,
short question.
okay.
about humor, I'm really interested in the resource. Were there examples, more or less directly, referring to historical periods or other political discourses? I mean, revising recent or not that recent Turkish history.
Do you have something in mind?
No, not really. I don't speak Turkish, so
Revising Turkish history.
or addressing other, I mean, historically different discourses through 20th century. Because we had such a problem here, I mean, with vocabulary, and yeah, this is what made a huge difference between the three different protests, probably.
Can you tell me the examples?
I'm not sure if I can translate them even, but probably someone would help me. It was about addressing groups of people with notions that come from something like at least 25 years ago. Let's go with that way. Yeah. I don't know what you call it. It's red rubbish and stuff like that.
Yeah, turning that kind of depreciative terms.
Probably subversing it, or
Yeah.
I'm not sure if my question is clear.
Yes, your question is clear, but I'm thinking about it. I don't know.
You
But
have
this-
the time to, you can think a little bit, and Tom Jones will ask his question. Tom?
Thank you for this enjoyable and interesting talk. And, I have sort of a three-layered question. One is, you mentioned it in the beginning of your talk, and I didn't hear it coming back because we're talking about, I'm thinking on the one hand, are we not exaggerating the global, the transnational similarities of these protests, given that very often the triggers are very different on a local scale? But in the first place, one of the similarities one sees on the other side of the coin, the way governments react. I mean, the populism you mentioned, the fact that, foreign influence is mentioned, usually a use of some kind of thugs to counter the protests, not necessarily security forces. The other aspect is, because I'm very curious about the Turkish case, having known another case of Maidan, and observed it more closely, and you mentioned the Tiananmen. I mean, what is the novelty really of these protests? Because we had the first Maidan in 1990, which was directly inspired by Tiananmen. We then had several more Maidans. Before Euromaidan, there was an increase in overall protest activity throughout Ukraine. So my question would be, was there any increase of protest activity before Gezi and Taksim, or how important were previous protest experiences, if there were any, basically in the Gezi and Taksim protests? And then, as a final point, you also mentioned, showed in your visuals, which was also very apparent in Maidan, this intergenerational solidarity. Is this an effect of previous experiences historically?
Is this
an effect, the result of previous experiences historically? I mean, when you say it's not exclusively a youth movement, in some cases these protests started by youth. Youth gets repressed, older generations come in, bring their experience along, and this sort of meddles into this new form, or this public square protest as we're discussing.
Okay. And finally, I will give the word to Milodina for her three questions, because every question contains...
A very short question. Thank you. You said you are at this point trying to find this new feature we have now of protesting, and what Tahir, Gezi bring new of what we had before in the history of revolutions or protests or manifestations, etc. But you didn't mention at all the so-called color revolutions, like the orange in Ukraine, which in a way may be some kind of in a kinship relationship with the last one, the Maidan. Then we had in Serbia the one successful one in a way, we shouldn't forget. In 2000, we got rid of Milosevic. So, do you see some common features in these different movements in the past as well? Because we talked about the art aspect that we already had in Serbia, with kissing policemen, having this kind of very peaceful, very friendly way to protest. But so, what are the differences? What are the new moments in these last revolutions or protests?
Thank you.
Okay, a whole agenda of research. Well, I mean, when you start from the historical point, historical perspective, nothing is new. You will finish. For historians, nothing is new. Everything already happened. So that is the big debate between historians and sociologists. And I think the advantage of the sociology is this consciousness about the present day. And then if they remain only as the one layer, it's not good. And we have to go back to the historical. But I don't start from the past and say everything is culminating and, okay, what is interesting is take what is happening today and then go back and see what are the possibilities to make us be more aware of the world in which we're living and the new forms of public agency. So I didn't want to make I think you are absolutely right coming to Orange Revolution, maybe kinship. These are very important ways of continuing that kind of research agenda, I would say. It will enrich in our ways of reading, that's for sure. It will be very interesting to enrich in our reading through these. But there are ways of enriching. But it is not the idea of how we make a historiography of all these social movements, okay? That's what I'm trying to put the emphasis on, our ways of being more aware of some kind of public agency and public sphere and vulnerability of the public sphere. And in spite of these movements, so I'm not saying that there are, coming to what you said, also similarities. I'm not showing similarities. I'm just trying to show some of the features that we find. Okay, so it's not this, because when we used to make comparison, it's always like, what is similar, what is different? But what we have to see is how we can enrich in our reading when we put these things together, like Orange Revolution. But the idea is not similarity and the differences. Through that, how we understand what is going on today. That is really, I think, is very important. And this will be very enriching. And how previous movements prepared this, also, this will be another very important enriching kind of bringing more layers and understanding to these movements. But for instance, I would like much more. There's so much material that we can use. Humor, coming back to humor, I would love to see more. Go and see what are the things that are produced already. Because we say just one word, art, but what kind of art? Yes, of course, in different movements, street art was already there. And in May 68 too. Nothing is totally new, but then things happen and converge and something new happens. It's like in art forms too. When you see an art form, there's a form. But when you see it, it is several influences and genealogies of different civilizations, multi-layered, but then there's a form at the end. So what we're trying to see is there is something different about public space democracy. Should we put a more emphasis on this performative kind of citizenship as an enactment of citizenship, more philosophically speaking? And I think there is something like that. There is something that is happening that citizens are kind of performative is also enactment of citizenship. So the politics is displaced into much more phenomenology of politics, much closer to the person, to the everyday life. So that's why I'm trying to get a bit further from social movements kind of discourse. Social movements discourse is where I'm also shaped by social movements with Alain Touraine, always social movements. That's why, and I think, of course, it helps us to understand these movements, but they are not social movements. There's something that we cannot really understand as a social movement when you know about the social movement vocabulary. But of course, it will again help us, but partially. And what I'm asking is there a form of public agency, performative citizenship that changes, that should change our ways of maybe understanding politics and public sphere from more discursive to performative, and not as a trivial thing. But I think when we speak about these dimensions of politics, always people have this kind of suspicion that these are trivial issues. Okay, I come back to my first moment of my how I was hijacked by a subject, veiling issue, Islamic veiling, the covering of Muslim women. When I started working on this seemed a trivial issue for everyone. I said, what veiling is? It's a kind of imposed by man, so it is not a real phenomenon. A real phenomenon is the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and then Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and Islamization movements and politics. So veiling didn't make part of politics, Islamist politics, for many of my colleagues. You can make the historiography on Islam the last 30 years. Then when I have written my book on Islamic veiling as really something that made the difference in Islamist movements, they considered it as something totally Turkish bizarrerie. They didn't want to publish it in French, saying that this is some kind of secularism and veiling. These are not issues that concern us. And then it became a totally dominant issue. So something very amorphous politically, because Islamic veiling was amorphous politically. Some people, persons, taking their Islamic veiling into public, and then suddenly it becomes visible, because the headscarf, the traditional headscarf, is not visible to anyone. The guest worker's headscarf was not visible. Visibility means there's a problem. There's a problem of subjectivity and perception. That's the public. It was already from the beginning a public movement. And it was not a social movement. So people didn't understand, who are these women? Are they coming from the same political party, same social movement, brotherhood? There were so many. It was public agency. And it became very decisive. So, so it's not trivial. I don't think it's a trivial issue. And maybe we should look at these protest movements more like this changing our public culture. This was the title of the journal I like as well, because we speak about public sphere. It changes the public culture. That is, the word in French now, after the terrorist attacks, comes all the time, is living together, and how to make living together. So politics is also how to make collective acting and living together. So that's why it's not only social movements in relation to the state power, but what are the norms of living together when you are in multicultural societies, when religious and secular divide is very important on abortion issues, veiling issues, mixity issues. So what are how you make society becomes a very important question of political stakes. Didn't I finish?